Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley and I am a Christian wife, mama of 3, homeschooler, and avid reader. This year I took a little bit of a different approach to my literary life plan, and I chose a male author of the year, a female author of the year, a poet of the year, and 1 reading challenge to complete. And in this video I'm going to share an update on my female author of the year, which is Jane Austen. It is my goal to read all of Jane Austen's 6 main novels, and thanks to a very special readathon that I just learned about, I'm going to get to dive into some of her other works as well, and that is Jane Austen July. So I'm really excited to talk about some of the Jane Austen books I've already read so far, and then what plans I have for the rest of the year and for Jane Austen July, and I hope that you all will join in with me because I am loving Jane Austen so far. The very first Jane Austen that I picked up this year was Mansfield Park, and this one is probably one of her least popular works. However, I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I flew through it. I read this book along with the Literary Life podcast. They are a podcast that reads books and kind of educates you along with them. So they give you historical background, a little bit of biography information about the author and the time, and a discussion about the characters that is so rich and fun and hilarious, and it absolutely enriched the experience of reading this. They probably did. This book is separated into several parts, and they broke each episode down into a few chapters. So you would read a few chapters and then go listen to the podcast and so on and so forth until you finished it, and so that is what I did. But in Mansfield Park, Fanny Price, who is the heroine of the story, is from a poor family. So her mother did not marry well, and so her mother's brother and sister, Fanny's aunt and uncle, decide to adopt her in order to help out. It's their good deed, their charity. So they adopt Fanny, bring her in, only to treat her horribly and pretend like she doesn't exist and pretend like she's not important, she's not noticed. They just kind of use her. Fanny is a character that really fades into the background very intentionally. She is terrified of being talked to, of being looked at, and it was very interesting to read about an introverted character, especially one who, although she's the heroine of the novel, was often lost in what was going on. All of a sudden you would be following some of the other characters and they would say, "Where is Fanny? Where is Fanny?" And you're like, yeah, where is Fanny? Isn't this book supposed to be about her? But I kind of thought that was hilarious that she just wanted to fade into the background, which is a really unique take on a heroine, because most of the time heroines are very bold and funny and witty, and in this book, sort of the anti-heroine, if you will, was the one who was bold and funny, and she was kind of the villain of the book. But Fanny, the heroine, was shy, and I loved reading about a shy character because it's just not something you see very often. So Fanny moves in with her family, and then the Crawfords move in with their relatives at the parsonage in Mansfield Park. And Henry and Mary Crawford are brother and sister that are up to no good and are there to stir up all sorts of trouble for Fanny and her cousins. Fanny has 4 cousins that she lives with, 2 girl cousins who are just about as ridiculous as could be, have no virtues whatsoever, are very much coquettish, if you will, and just not good. Her oldest male cousin is kind of one of those who gets himself into a lot of trouble. He's just out to have a good time. He's not very serious. But her cousin Edmund is just her rock. He is the one person in the family who never forgets Fanny, who is always concerned about her and making sure that she's well taken care of. And I just really loved that dynamic. However, when the Crawfords come along, there's a bit of a love triangle there, because although Fanny and Edmund are cousins, which is strange, but this is just the time of Jane Austen's time. That was very normal for cousins to marry. She was in love with Edmund, and Edmund falls in love with Mary Crawford, who is just the absolute opposite of virtue, and Edmund is virtue himself. So for him to kind of fall and be tempted by that character was really crazy to watch. And then Mary Crawford's brother, Henry Crawford, is stirring up all kinds of drama between the sisters, and one of the sisters who is engaged to be married and then is married, and it's a lot of drama to see how it unfolds. I've heard a lot of people say that this book is really boring, but I didn't think so, and mostly because Jane Austen does such a great job with her characters that it's really the characters that drive the story. They're just so quirky and so ridiculous that they're real, and it makes it a completely different experience to have a real deep dive into a character's life, even their vices, their virtues. They're not perfect characters whatsoever. They get themselves into real life messes, and I found that I really loved it. And what I really loved about this book is kind of what it had to say about education and about class. So just because you had a really high class education doesn't mean that you're a virtuous person. And we see that in Mary Crawford and then Fanny's two cousins. We just see that no matter how proper they are, no matter what class of society they're in, they fall a lot more to temptation than Fanny does, who is sort of lower birth, but her virtue just sails her above the rest. So I loved Mansfield Park. It's one of my favorites of Jane Austen that I've read so far, so I'm curious to see how Fanny Price will stand up next to the other heroines. But the next Jane Austen I read was Persuasion, and in Persuasion we follow Anne Elliot, who is another character who kind of fades into the background of her family. However, unlike Fanny, Anne actually does have a mind of her own and isn't afraid to take charge in a room. She is kind of the one person in her family who is composed and who is collected. But the name of the book is Persuasion, and that is because when Anne Elliot was very young, she fell in love with a young Mr. Wentworth, who was absolutely not good enough for her family in any way, shape, or form. And although she loved him, she was persuaded not to marry him, which absolutely broke his heart. So what does he do? He goes off, makes a name for himself, becomes Captain Wentworth, makes his name, makes his wealth. He comes back, and he's ready to find a wife. And you can just imagine the tension between these two, because at first they kind of don't really think they're ever going to meet, but they are put in constant closeness to each other, and you can just feel the tension. You can feel the hurt that Anne has in seeing him, and you don't necessarily get the side of Captain Wentworth. You really can't tell, like, does he still love her? Does he think horribly of her? It's so cold and civil, but there could be something there. And I found that this one was a little bit slower for me than Mansfield Park. I didn't like it as much for some reason, and I can't necessarily nail down why, because I did love Anne Elliot's character. Like I said, unlike Fanny, she was not shy, but she was more put together, and I'm really surprised, honestly, that in her younger years she was persuaded away from the love of her life, because Anne Elliot is constancy itself, which is a huge deal in a lot of Jane Austen's books, is the idea of constancy and always loving one person and never changing or swaying in that. And that was a theme in this book that was really fun to explore, and kind of the idea that true love exists. Doesn't matter how many years have gone by. When you love someone, and that's it. But the ending, particularly in this one, was worth it. It was really slow and really painful at points, just emotionally, not because of the writing. Once again, the way Jane Austen portrays characters is so interesting in itself. The writing is so great that it makes the story fun, even if nothing is happening. But the ending of this book just was so satisfying. I can't even explain why, because I don't want to give anything away, but I just kind of thought, oh, yes, thank you. And so far I've learned that in all of Jane Austen's books, her last chapter always wraps everything up nicely with a neat bow. All of the bad characters, all of the good characters, you see how it all plays out for everybody, and I really love that she does that. And the last book that I've read so far from Jane Austen is, of course, Pride and Prejudice. Now, this is not my first time reading Pride and Prejudice. I've read this 3 or 4 times before, and it's always been one of my favorite books. This time I decided to listen to Pride and Prejudice on Audible, and I chose the one narrated by Rosamund Pike, and she did such a fabulous job. If you don't know who Rosamund Pike is, she plays Jane in one of the newer Pride and Prejudice adaptations, and she did such an excellent job with all of the voices, and I loved diving into the story again and just the ridiculousness of Elizabeth Bennet's family, especially in the book, because it's been so many years since I have read the book that I've kind of forgotten just how ridiculous they really are, especially Mr. Collins and her sisters and her mother. I'm kind of noticing a theme here that so far in the Jane Austen books I've read, the heroine seems to be the one who is composed, collected, and virtuous, whereas she's just kind of surrounded by a ridiculous family that makes things not ideal for her or for her situation. But I don't necessarily feel the need to talk a ton about Pride and Prejudice and what it's about, because most of you probably know or probably heard it. I knew what Pride and Prejudice was about before I read it, just like I already kind of know what Emma is about and what Northanger Abbey is about, even though I haven't read either of those yet, just because she's so popular. But this is still one of my favorite books of all time. Pride and Prejudice is still one that I'm going to go back to time and time and time again. I just love it. I love when people really misunderstand one another, when characters just really misjudge between their pride and their prejudice another character, but they kind of have something that happens to them that really humbles them and changes the way they see the world and other people. And I absolutely loved it. Once again, the ending was one where Jane Austen wrapped everything up neatly with a bow. It was great. I would still say that Pride and Prejudice is my favorite, one of my favorite books of all time, but still my favorite Jane Austen. So far, it's Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Persuasion. So what's next? Well, I am participating in Jane Austen July, and for the group read-along, they are reading Sense and Sensibility. And I know nothing about Sense and Sensibility. For some reason, this is a book I've never watched any of the movie adaptations. I've never really heard it talked about much, except for in one of my favorite books from last year, With This Pledge by Tamara Alexander. This is a Christian historical fiction romance that takes place during the Civil War, and this is based off of a real woman who lived at the Carton House during the Battle of Franklin, which was one of the final battles that ended the Civil War. But anyway, in the book, she mentions that Sense and Sensibility is her favorite book, and the love interest reads it. Wonderful, sweet moment. But ever since I read that, I wanted to read Sense and Sensibility. I still don't know what it's about, so I can't tell you that. I know that there are two sisters in it. That's pretty much all, which is great. I'm so glad. I don't know the ending. I don't know who the love interests are, so I'm going to go into this one completely blind and do it as a read-along with Jane Austen July and just dive in and enjoy the story. This is one of Jane Austen's longer works, which I like. I've learned that I really appreciate big, long books that never end, because once I get into a story that I love, I never want it to end. So please don't spoil it, but please let me know if you like this book. I'm really excited to read it. I've loved Jane Austen so far, and even though I don't know what this is about, I just have a feeling, I just do, that it could be a favorite. So we'll see. But for Jane Austen July, some of the prompts, which I'm not going to do all of them, so Sense and Sensibility is for the one of Jane Austen's big 6 novels prompt. And then for a sort of nonfiction book about Jane Austen, I am going to read Lucy Worsley's biography, Jane Austen at Home. I've heard great things about this, and now that I've read some of Jane Austen's works, I care about her as a person, as an author, and I want to learn more about her. So this prompt is the perfect timing to do that and just add on to my Jane Austen in a Year challenge. And then the next book I'm going to read is a Jane Austen retelling, kind of. And this one isn't necessarily a retelling, but more of a continuation of a story, and that is The Other Bennet Sister And I don't own the book yet, so I'm blanking on the author, but I will put a picture of the book here and also include the author in the description below. But it is about Mary Bennet, who I have always felt was completely misjudged and ill-used in Pride and Prejudice. I don't know why. I just always, number one, kind of thought maybe Mr. Collins should have looked at Mary because she's so sort of religious, perhaps self-righteous. Yes, but I have a feeling in the book, the other Bennet sister, she's going to grow up and kind of pull herself out of self-righteousness and kind of find a better balance. But I always loved her character. She may not have been beautiful, but she was always kind of more put together, and she knew who she was, and she wasn't gonna budge on any of her values. And so I'm really excited to see her story and to see her flourish, and then to see if in this book we sort of interact with some of the other sisters and characters and what are they doing and what are they up to. So I'm really excited about that one because I didn't even know that book existed, and I have always wanted more for Mary Bennet. And so now I think I'm gonna get it. But some of the other prompts are, read some of Jane Austen's lesser known works. And in Jane Austen July, I know that they're going to be reading Sanditon, the Lady Susan, and I think the Watsons as well. So I'm just gonna follow along with their read along and do that throughout the month. I think they start with Sense and Sensibility and then move on to Sanditon, and maybe then the Watsons and then the Lady Susan. I'm not sure, but I will put links in the description below where you can find the prompts and the challenge and the reading guide for all of those books. But that's all I'm gonna do. There's a couple of more prompts. However, because I've already read some of Jane Austen and because of the reading challenge I'm doing this year, I feel like I can fill those gaps at other times. So I'm just going to focus on reading Sense and Sensibility, the Jane Austen biography, the other Bennet sister, and if I have time to do some of those other lesser known works, I'll do those as well, which I'm going to try to read along with the whole Jane Austen July group. So we'll try. But after that, I'm going to read Emma, and I do kind of know what this is about. I know it's about a heroine who tries to basically play matchmaking, and it's a disaster. I know that the main character, Emma, was written to intentionally kind of be annoying and grow throughout the book. However, because of that, even though I know it's on purpose, I don't want to read it. I don't like when people meddle with other people's lives. I hate it. It's so cringy to me. But I believe in Jane Austen. I've read enough so far that I guarantee I will read this and love it and be pleased. I don't know how much I will love the main character, Emma, herself, but if she goes through a big change and growth, then I probably will. I don't know the ending. This is another book. I think it's a happy ending. I'm pretty sure I know who the love interest's name is and how that ends, but I don't know how it unfolds. So I'm still excited for this one, and I will probably get to Emma probably sometime in August or September, which then leads me to my final Jane Austen book for the year, which is Northanger Abbey. And I am very, very excited about this one because this is a satire on the kind of gothic romance that was very popular in Jane Austen's time. So the main character, which I'm completely blanking on right now, but she's supposed to be very quirky and funny, but she goes to this gothic house and is looking for mysterious doorways and just people hidden in the rooms, and it's just supposed to be kind of silly and fun, and I think I'm really going to enjoy it because I finished Jane Eyre earlier this year, which is my favorite book of all time. And so to read kind of a satire of that gothic novel romance, but written by Jane Austen in that time, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm saving it for the fall because it's supposed to be gothic, so I think it will work well for October. And by that point, I will have read all of Jane Austen's 6 main novels, hopefully a biography, and then hopefully some of those lesser known works. If I don't get to some of those unfinished or lesser known works like Sanditon, the Lady Susan, and the Watsons, if I don't finish that in July, then I'm going to try to finish that at the end of the year. And that will wrap up all of the Jane Austen for me for the year. This has been so fun, choosing one author and just really diving into all of their works at once, because I have made so many connections so far, just seeing what Jane Austen believes about certain personality types and how she shapes her heroines. I feel like the first 3 books I've read, the heroines are different in a lot of ways, but I also saw a lot of similarities in the structure. So the heroines are kind of that shining star, but all their family members around them just make them look terrible because they're so awful and ridiculous. And I don't know if that's how it's going to be in Jane Austen's other 3 books, so I don't know if that just happened by chance or if that's something that is similar in all of them. But I'm very, very excited to keep going. Please in the comments below tell me if you have read some of these Jane Austen books, and share with me your favorite Jane Austen novel, and if you're going to participate in Jane Austen July with me. Like I said, I will put links in the description box for all of those challenges and books, and I will see you in July with some more Jane Austen. Happy reading, friends!